Todd built his career on tearing guests apart, thinking he was untouchable. But when Clint Eastwood sat across from him, that confidence started to crack. And then completely shattered. One sentence. Boom. The audience exploded. The internet caught fire, and Todd's career was hanging by a thread. He thought he was running the interview. Turns out, he was the one being taken down. But let's rewind to where it all began. Los Angeles, 2024. The city was drowning in LED billboards, overpriced coffee, and influencers pretending to have deep thoughts. But nothing, and I mean nothing, was more artificial than Todd Ellsworth, the smug-faced puppet of corporate television. 42 years old, hairline suspiciously perfect, and a personality so fake it made plastic jealous, Todd had spent years perfecting the fine art of public humiliation. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't an entertainer. He was a glorified internet troll in a $3,000 suit. And his show? The Spotlight. A talk show built on cornering guests, throwing loaded questions, and watching them squirm under studio lights. He had destroyed actors, musicians, politicians. Anyone who dared sit in that chair across from him. America loved it. So when it was announced that Clint Eastwood, a 94-year-old legend who had survived Hollywood's entire history of scandals, politics, and cancel attempts, was coming on the show, people lost their minds. The internet went nuts. Bro, is Eastwood even alive? Todd's about to retire him for good. Or Clint's gonna teach this dude why they called him Dirty Harry. Todd smelled ratings gold, and he was ready. For the past week, he had combed through decades of footage. Every controversial quote, interview slip-up, and moment where Clint didn't play nice with Hollywood's evolving values. Todd wasn't here for a polite conversation. He was here to eviscerate. Showtime. Backstage, the energy was off. The production crew, usually confident, cocky even, was nervous. People whispered in hushed tones. This could be a disaster. This could be TV history, or this could be the moment Todd finally bites off more than he can chew. But Todd was chilling. Legs crossed in his obnoxiously white leather chair, sipping a ridiculously overpriced energy drink like he was about to win the Super Bowl. The audience was prepped, handpicked, just like always. They knew their role, laugh when Todd lands a jab, gasp when the guest messes up, lose their minds when things get heated. This was manufactured chaos, and Todd was the puppet master. 5 minutes till showtime. Clint, sitting in the dressing room, no entourage, no agent, no PR rep, just a 94-year-old man in the leather jacket, sipping black coffee, staring at the mirror like he had zero concern about what was coming next. He looked less like a guest on a talk show and more like a gunslinger about to walk into a saloon full of outlaws. And Todd? Todd was about to find out what happens when you bet against a legend. Cameras live. 3, 2, 1. Todd's manufactured smile lit up the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Spotlight. And tonight we have a legend. A man who, for over 6 decades, has defined masculinity, toughness, and cinematic excellence. Then his smirk widened, and his tone turned playful. But has the world moved on? Instant tension. Todd was already setting the stage, framing Eastwood as outdated before the interview even started. And Clint didn't move. No polite nod, no rehearsed smile, just sat there, stone-faced. Todd continued. Please welcome the one and only Clint Eastwood. Cue applause signs flashing. The audience exploded. Cheers, whistles, standing ovation. The kind that TV producers dream about. And Clint still didn't move. Not even a blink. Just cold, unflinching silence. Todd's smile twitched for half a second. Then he regrouped. He wiped fake sweat off his brow. Wow, you've still got them under your spell, Clint. That's impressive for a man your age. The audience chuckled, but it felt uneasy, like everyone in the room had just realized they were playing with fire. Clint blinked slowly, then leaned forward. His posture didn't change much, but suddenly it felt like the entire studio belonged to him. Todd leaned in too, flashing that $10,000 smirk. Clint, let's start with something easy. You've been in this industry for over 60 years. Do you think Hollywood still has a place for guys like you? Clint exhaled, not a sigh, more like a man deciding if someone was worth his time. Then, in a voice that sounded like a whiskey-soaked razor blade, he replied, "Do you?" Dead silence. Todd's face twitched. For the first time in his career, he hesitated. Then, he recovered. "Well, the industry's changing." Todd shrugged. "Some say for the better, some say for the worse. What do you say?" Clint tilted his head slightly like he was examining a bug. Then, "I say people like you talk too much." Boom. The audience gasped. Todd's eye twitched. This wasn't how this was supposed to go, but he was a professional. He forced a chuckle. "Oh, I love that. Vintage Clint Eastwood." Then he went in for the kill shot. "But let's be real, Clint. Hollywood's evolved past the old gritty white guy with a gun phase. The world's more progressive now, more inclusive. Do you feel out of touch? Yeah." Clint rubbed his stubbled chin, gaze never breaking. Then, looking Todd dead in the eye, he muttered, "Son, you wouldn't last 5 minutes in the world I grew up in." The audience erupted, people on their feet, cheering, losing their minds. Todd's grip tightened on the chair. His scripted takedown was slipping through his fingers like dry sand. He needed to regain control. So, he pulled out the nuclear option, his ace in the hole. Todd cleared his throat, then smirked. "Okay, Clint, let's talk about racism." Instant silence. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Todd's eyes glowed with predatory delight. He had baited the trap. Now, Eastwood was screwed, or so he thought. Because what happened next would go down as one of the most insane moments in live television history. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. The kind that gripped the room by the throat and refused to let go. Todd knew what he was doing. This was his playground, his kingdom of gotcha moments, and he had just thrown down the ultimate trap card. Let's talk about racism. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The audience shifted in their seats. Backstage, the producers were freaking out. This wasn't a pre-approved talking point. This wasn't on the cue cards. This was the kind of moment that could end a career or immortalize it. And Todd? He smelled blood. The setup, Todd leaned forward, that signature smug grin plastered across his face. His voice dropped into that fake, serious tone, the same one he had used to make countless guests stammer, apologize, and crumble under pressure. "Clint, let's be real. Some of your older films, they haven't aged well. The tough guy cowboy, the rogue cop. Some critics say they glorify a culture of toxic masculinity, a culture that was exclusionary, especially to people of color. Do you ever look back and think, maybe you were part of the problem?" The bait was set. Todd waited for the old man's stumble, the awkward pause, the defensive backpedal. Instead, Clint smiled, not a big, fake Hollywood smile, not a nervous twitch of the lips, a slow, deliberate, chilling grin, like a lion spotting a wounded gazelle. The audience felt it. The shift. The room tilted in his favor before he even spoke. Clint adjusted his jacket, cracked his neck like a man stretching before a fight. And then, "Son," he drawled, voice soaked in gravel, "I've buried people who talk to me like that." Boom! The audience erupted. Screams, whistles, thunderous applause. Todd's soul nearly left his body. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. But Todd was a pro, and pros improvise. He forced a laugh, his voice a little too high. "Oh ho ho, that's intense, Clint. Very vintage of you." Clint didn't blink, didn't break eye contact. Todd swallowed. Time for round 2. The push Todd leaned in, dropping the act just a little. But let's stay on topic. Dirty Harry, Gran Torino, The Outlaw, Josie Wales. All great movies, but don't you think they reinforced outdated ideals, even racist ones? He was doubling down. The air got heavier. The audience wasn't sure what they were watching anymore. An interview or a gunfight at high noon? Clint leaned back, gaze locked onto Todd like he was deciding whether or not to let him leave the room alive. Then, he spoke. "Son, let me tell you a little story." The crowd hushed. Todd, he was sweating now. The story. Clint's voice was low, steady, dangerous. "When I was young, too young to know better, I worked on a ranch. It was hard work, brutal, backbreaking. And one day, an old black cowboy, toughest man I ever met, told me something I never forgot. He paused. Let it sink in. Todd? Dead quiet. Clint's eyes never wavered. He said, kid, the world don't give a damn what color you are. The only thing that matters is if you can ride, fight, and work harder than the next man. The audience leaned in. Clint's voice dropped even lower. Hollywood forgot that. A beat. Then, but I didn't. The crowd went insane, screaming, applauding, stomping their feet. Todd? Todd looked like a man watching his own execution in slow motion, but he wasn't giving up, not yet. He forced a chuckle, trying to look casual. That's a nice sentiment, Clint, but let's be honest. Things were different back then, and some people would argue that the kind of characters you played, they contributed to a culture of intolerance. Another push, a desperate grasp for control. Clint sighed, rubbing his temple like a disappointed father. Then, the kill shot. You ever seen a real fight, Todd? Todd blinked. I mean not... Clint cut him off. A real fight, not a Twitter argument, not a discourse on your little show, a real blood-on-the-floor fight. Todd stammered. Well, I don't think that's relevant to... Clint leaned forward. See, the difference between guys like me and guys like you is that we lived our lives. You just talk about them. Destruction. The audience erupted again. Todd's face flushed red. He was losing the room, and before he could recover, Clint went for the final shot, the final blow. You sit here, in your little chair, throwing stones at men who built the house you're sitting in. You think talking about change is the same as living through it. I was making films before your daddy even figured out how to tie his shoes. And if you think you're going to sit here with your fancy suit and your scripted questions and tell me about the world, Clint leaned in. I've buried men tougher than you, son. Todd's face drained of color. The audience screaming, losing their minds. Todd's career on life support. Todd, now panicking, tried to pivot. Well, we have to go to commercial. Clint, still staring daggers, muttered. You should. The studio was chaos. The cameras had barely faded back in, but the energy in the room was electric. The kind of raw, unfiltered tension you could feel in your bones. The audience? They weren't calming down. People were still on their feet, clapping, shouting, cheering like they had just watched a heavyweight title fight. Some were looking around, wide-eyed, shaking their heads, whispering to each other like they couldn't believe what they had just seen. #Clintown's Todd was already trending. Social media was on fire. Clips of Clint's verbal beatdown were already making the rounds on Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Bro, Clint just folded Todd like a lawn chair on live TV. Todd thought he was setting a trap. Clint buried him in it. When a man who survived Hollywood for 60 years says, I've buried people like you listen. Backstage, the producers were scrambling. People were frantically whispering into earpieces, throwing desperate glances at each other like they had just realized they were piloting a plane straight into the ground. And Todd? Todd looked shaken. The ever-smug, ever-polished king of ambush TV was now gripping the edges of his desk, like it was the only thing keeping him from falling over. His perfectly styled hair, a little out of place, his signature Hollywood smile, now a stiff, nervous grimace, his confidence, evaporating like mist under a desert sun. And Clint? Clint was just sitting there, perfectly still, perfectly calm, his gaze locked on Todd like a sniper sighting in. It was like watching a storm roll in, slow, inevitable, unstoppable. Todd swallowed hard, his throat visibly tightening on camera. Still, he tried to push forward, tried to regain some control, tried to salvage whatever dignity he had left. He forced a shaky smile and stammered, Wow, Clint, that was quite the response. I think the audience... But Clint wasn't done. The final round, Clint leaned forward just a little, enough to make Todd instinctively lean back. His voice, still low, still steady, still carrying the weight of decades, cut through the noise like a blade. You ever ride a horse, Todd? Todd blinked. No. Clint nodded slowly, as if that answer had just confirmed everything he already knew. Figures. Boom, another hit. The audience lost it again. People were doubling over, clapping, whistling, yelling at the top of their lungs. Some guy in the front row literally fell out of his seat laughing. Todd let out a weak chuckle, but it was so forced it could have been AI generated. He flipped desperately through his cue cards, looking for something, anything, that could pull him out of this wreck. So, Clint, before we wrap up, but Clint wasn't done. The knockout punch. Clint tilted his head just slightly, eyes still locked on Todd. You ever been punched, Todd? Todd froze. The audience went dead silent. This was different. This was something else entirely. Todd forced a nervous laugh. Excuse me? Clint didn't move, didn't blink, didn't change his tone. No? He nodded again, as if that was the most predictable answer in the world. Didn't think so. The crowd? Hysterical. People were screaming, stomping their feet. Someone in the back actually started banging on the armrest of their chair. The sound levels in the studio peaked so hard, the audio engineer backstage was probably crying. Todd was sweating now, but he was desperate, so he tried to pivot. He forced another strained laugh and lifted his hands in mock surrender. Well, I don't think violence... The absolute finish, Clint, didn't let him finish. Didn't let him breathe. Clint leaned in even closer, voice dropping to a level so low, it felt like the entire studio was holding its breath. That's your problem. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. Then, you think words replace action. You think just because you read something on the internet, you know how the world works. Todd's face went pale. The room was dead quiet now. The audience was frozen in place. Todd gulped. Clint let it sink in. Then, just as Todd opened his mouth to respond, Clint finished him off. You ever get hit in the mouth, Todd? Because you talk like a man who never has. The audience exploded. This wasn't just applause. This was pandemonium. People were screaming. The standing ovation wasn't just enthusiastic. It was a full-blown riot. A camera operator literally had to steady himself because the sound waves were shaking the floor. Todd? Todd looked like he was about to pass out. His hands twitched on the desk. His eyes darted to the producers, the crew, the audience, anyone who could throw him a lifeline. But no one was coming to save him. The script was gone. The control was gone. The show? Completely, utterly derailed. The end game. Todd panicked, voice shaking, tried one last escape move. We have to go to commercial. Clint didn't even blink. Still staring straight into Todd's soul, he muttered, You should. Cut to black. The screen snapped to commercial so fast, it looked like someone yanked the power cord. The show was instantly cut short. The producers had pulled the plug. Todd, his career might as well have gone to commercial too. The aftermath. By the next morning, Todd's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Sponsors started backing out. The network distanced itself, and the memes? Oh, the memes were ruthless. Todd, let's talk about racism. Clint, let's talk about your ability to take a hit. Todd thought he was the main character. Clint reminded him he was an NPC. What would you have done in Todd's place? Tried to fight back or taken the loss with dignity? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your experiences, and let us know if you or someone you know has ever been put in their place like this. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and don't forget to subscribe for more hard-hitting moments like this. This story isn't about conflict. It's about shedding light on real issues and making the world a better place through awareness and conversation. Your opinion matters.